The void between stars was never truly silent. Commander Vorgul of the Vorthak Dominion knew this better than most. His warship, the Eclipse Fang, drifted at the edge of uncharted space, its silver-purple hull drinking in the faint starlight. The ship was a brutalist masterpiece, all sharp angles and gunmetal plating, its surfaces etched with the scars of 100 battles. The bridge hummed with the low, pulsing thrum of its core, a violet energy reactor that powered weapons capable of glassing entire worlds. And yet, for all its might, the Eclipse Fang had been sent here to investigate something far more unsettling than war. Not the natural hiss of cosmic radiation, but something deliberate. A signal, repeating in erratic bursts, bleeding through the comm arrays like a whisper from the dark. Vorgul's claws flexed against the armrest of his command throne. His secondary eyelids flicked sideways in irritation. "Gromnock," he rumbled, his voice a bass growl that resonated through the bridge. "Explain this noise." The scientist, a spindly Vorthak, whose carapace bore the dull sheen of a lifetime spent in laboratories rather than battle, flinched at the command. His mandibles twitched as he worked the console, his four-fingered hands dancing over the holographic displays. The data streamed upward in jagged silver lines, pulsing in time with the signal. "It's not natural interference, Commander," Gromnock admitted. His voice was thin, reedy, the sound of a creature who had spent too long speaking to machines rather than warriors. "The pattern suggests artificial origin, a transmission, but the encoding is unlike anything in Dominion archives." Vorgul exhaled through his nasal vents, the sound a slow, deliberate hiss. The Dominion had mapped this sector centuries ago. There were no civilizations here, no species capable of broadcasting beyond their own atmosphere. And yet, the static persisted. "Trace it," Vorgul ordered. The Eclipse Fang's engines flared to life, their violet drive cores casting eerie shadows across the bridge. The ship banked, following the signal's origin deeper into the black. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, it floated in the void like a corpse, its shattered hull twisted and blackened. The design was alien, yet unmistakably military. Angular plating, reinforced bulkheads, the scorched remains of what might have been weapon mounts. The damage was catastrophic. Something had torn through this vessel like a predator through prey. Gromnock's breath hitched. "Commander, the signal, it's coming from inside." Vorgul's spine stiffened. Boarding protocols were enacted without hesitation. A detachment of Vorthak warriors, clad in armored exosuits, jetted across the gap between ships. Their plasma cutters hissed as they carved through the derelict's airlock inside. The darkness was absolute. The Vorthak switched to thermal vision, their optics painting the world in gradients of violet and black. The corridors were a graveyard, twisted metal, frozen fluids, the skeletal remains of creatures long dead. And then they found it, a console. Still active, the screen flickered weakly, its dying power supply barely sustaining the last message it had ever received. Gromnock, his claws trembling, interfaced with the system. The Dominion's translation algorithms whirred to life, parsing the alien language into something comprehensible. The words appeared on the Eclipse Fang's main display. "This is Colonel Amanda Vala of the Terran Defense Fleet. If you're receiving this, you're already too late. They're coming, and they don't stop. Don't try to fight. Don't try to run. Just..." The transmission cut off. Vorgul stared at the screen, his blood running cold. Gromnock swallowed hard. "Commander, who were they running from?" Outside the derelict's shattered viewports, the stars burned cold and indifferent. Somewhere in the dark, something answered. The silence on the Eclipse Fang's bridge was absolute. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the dark steel surface groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyelids flicked sideways, scanning the frozen wreckage outside the viewport. The derelict human ship. What remained of it was a carcass of war, its hull torn open like prey beneath a predator's claws. Gromnock's neural tendrils twitched as he parsed the last fragments of the human transmission. The Dominion's translation matrix had done its work, but the words made no sense. They don't stop. Who? What? The humans had been nothing more than scattered, primitive colonies when the Vorthak Dominion last surveyed this sector. Now, their wreckage told a different story. Run a full scan, Vorgul growled. Every fragment, every energy signature. I want to know what did this. The Eclipse Fang's sensors pulsed outward, bathing the debris field in silver-purple waves. The data returned in jagged spikes. Carbon scoring from weapons fire, molecular fractures from kinetic impacts, residual radiation signatures that didn't match any known Dominion arsenal. And then, the corpses, Gromnock's mandibles tightened as the bioscans resolved. Human remains? Yes, but not just human. Something else. Something wrong. The bodies were mangled, limbs torn free, torsos caved inward, as if crushed by immense force. Some were half, fused to the bulkheads, their flesh and armor melted together in grotesque sculptures of agony. But the worst part was the claw marks. Deep savage furrows gouged into the metal, each one wider than a Vorthak warrior's forearm. The edges were jagged, not clean, as if whatever made them had chewed through the hull. Gromnock's voice was a whisper. Commander, these wounds, they're not from weapons. Vorgul's spines flared along his back. He had fought in 100 battles across the Dominion's expansion. He had seen war in all its forms, plasma burns, railgun perforations, the elegant devastation of antimatter warheads. This was none of those things. This was feeding. A proximity alert shrieked through the bridge. One of the drones, sent to scout the derelict's reactor core, had just gone dark. No explosion, no distress signal, just silence. Then the second drone vanished, then the third. Vorgul's blood turned to ice. Recall all remaining units. Now, the Eclipse Fang's external cameras caught the movement, a shadow, massive and sinuous, slithering through the wreckage. It moved too fast for the sensors to lock onto, a blur of armored segments and grasping appendages. Then, with a shudder, the entire derelict shifted. Metal screamed. The human ship's carcass split apart, its spine snapping as something pushed its way out from within. Gromnock's neural tendrils went rigid. By the void, the creature unfolded into the black. It was a nightmare-given form, a chitinous horror of overlapping plates, each one darker than the void between stars. Its limbs were too many, too long, ending in hooked talons that flexed with predatory hunger. A maw split its underbelly, ringed with serrated bone spurs, dripping with fluids that sizzled against the frozen hull fragments. And its eyes, 6 of them, burning with violet bioluminescence, locked onto the Eclipse Fang. Vorgul's combat instincts roared to life. Evasive maneuvers, all weapons. The creature moved. One moment it was coiled among the wreckage. The next, it surged, crossing the distance between ships in a single lunge. The Eclipse Fang's point, defense turrets spat silver, purple plasma, but the bolts shattered harmlessly against the creature's hide. Then impact. The bridge shuddered as something massive struck the hull. Alerts blared. Breaches on decks 7 through 9, atmosphere venting, power fluctuations. The creature was climbing the ship, its talons punching through armor, plating like wet parchment. Vorgul bared his fangs. Full thrust. Shake it off. The Eclipse Fang's engines flared, hurling the ship forward. For a heartbeat, the creature's grip faltered. Then it dug in, its limbs flexing as it hauled itself closer. A new alert flashed. The creature was emitting something, a pulse, low and resonant, vibrating through the hull. The frequency matched the human derelict's last recorded energy spike. Gromnock's voice was hollow. It's calling them. Outside, the stars blinked out, not from distance, from movement, shadows detached from the void, uncoiling from the dark like serpents awakening. each one identical to the first, their violet eyes igniting as they turned toward the Eclipse Fang. The last human transmission played in Vorgul's mind. "They're coming," the creatures screamed. A sound that ruptured the calms, a chorus of hunger and hate. And then the swarm descended. The void rippled. Vorgul's claws dug into the command console, his neural interface screaming with proximity alerts. The Eclipse Fang shuddered as the creatures. No, the things surged forward, their forms blotting out the stars. Their bodies were wrong. Too fluid, too alive for machines, yet too precise, too engineered for organic life. Silver, purple energy pulsed beneath their armored carapaces, veins of violent light threading through their segmented limbs. Gromnock's voice was a whisper. "They're not just ships." The first impact rocked the Eclipse Fang like a meteor strike. The creature, one of them, slammed into the dorsal plating, its talons shearing through reinforced alloy as if it were foil. Vorgul's tactical display dissolved into chaos. Shields flared and died in bursts of violet static. Hull integrity warnings bled across the screen in jagged red glyphs. "Evasive pattern Zeta 9, Vorgul barked. The Eclipse Fang twisted, engines howling as it attempted to shake the monstrosity loose. For a moment, it worked. The creature's grip slipped, its talons screeching against the hull. Then, with a sound like fracturing bone, it dug in deeper. A new alert flashed, energy signature detected. The creature's core pulsed, a sickly silver-purple glow swelling beneath its armored plates. The frequency matched the derelict human vessel's last transmission, the same pulse that had summoned the swarm. Gromnock's frill flattened against his skull. "It's not just calling them, it's feeding them data." The swarm moved, not as individual hunters, but as a single entity, a vast neural net of hunger and calculation. They flowed, shifting formation with eerie synchronicity, cutting off escape vectors before the Eclipse Fang could compute them. Vorgul's blood ran cold. This was not an attack. This was a hunt. The creatures knew the Eclipse Fang's systems, its weaknesses, its evasion protocols. They had learned from the derelict, from the last human ship they had torn apart. And now they were applying that knowledge. A proximity alert shrieked, too late. 3 more creatures latched onto the Eclipse Fang's underbelly, their talons punching through the ventral thrusters. The ship lurched, engines sputtering as plasma vents ruptured. Vorgul snarled, slamming a clawed fist onto the weapon's console. All batteries, fire at will. The Eclipse Fang's pulse cannons roared, spearing the void with lances of violet energy. A direct hit, one creature's carapace shattered, its body erupting in a storm of molten alloy and writhing nanite tendrils. For a heartbeat, Vorgul dared to hope. Then the creature reformed. Its shattered pieces drew back together, liquid metal and pulsing energy knitting into a grotesque parody of life. The swarm learned, adapting to the Eclipse Fang's firepower, shifting their approach to minimize damage. Gromnock's voice was hollow. "They're not just machines, they're alive, and they're getting smarter." Vorgul's mind raced. The humans had fought these things, survived them. How? A new alert blared, external comms. The transmission was fragmented, corrupted by centuries of static, but the words burned through the Eclipse Fang speakers like a knife through flesh. "If you're hearing this, you've met them. They're called the Hollow. They learn, they adapt, but they have one weakness." The signal dissolved into noise. Vorgul's claws tightened. The swarm screamed, a sound that shattered the comms, a chorus of fury and anticipation. And then the Eclipse Fang's sensors detected something else. Something worse. Beyond the swarm, hidden in the dark, something larger stirred. The last human transmission played in Vorgul's mind, the words twisting into a prophecy. They're coming, and they were not alone. Section. Faye. A voice from the dark, the static hissed like a dying breath, the last words of the human transmission, clawing at the edges of comprehension. Vorgul stood frozen at the command nexus, his silver-purple armor reflecting the dim, pulsing glow of the Eclipse Fang's emergency lighting. The ship groaned around him, its brutalist alloy frame shuddering under the weight of the swarm's psychic scream. Gromnock's talons trembled over the console, his usually precise movements erratic. The scientist's violet ocular implants flickered as he parsed the corrupted data stream. "The signal is repeating," he murmured, his voice a rasp of disbelief. "It's not just a distress call, it's a warning." Vorgul's mandibles twitched. The humans had known. They had fought these things, these hollow, and left this message, like a flare in the dark, a final act of defiance, or perhaps a weapon. The swarm outside shifted, their silver-black forms writhing in the void like a storm of razors. They had stopped advancing, instead, they watched. As if waiting, a new alert flared across the tactical display. Something was emerging from the black, not the swarm, not the hollow. The silhouette resolved into a vessel, jagged, asymmetrical, its hull a patchwork of scarred armor plates and exposed machinery. It bore no resemblance to the sleek, weaponized designs of Vorthak warships. This was something born of desperation, of war without end. Its engines burned a deep, bloody crimson, a color that clashed violently against the silver-purple void. Gromnock's breath hitched. "That's impossible," Vorgul finished. The human ship was ancient, centuries old. If the radiation decay signatures were accurate, and yet it moved with purpose, gliding through the swarm as if the hollow were nothing more than mist. Then the transmission came again. This time, clear, a human voice. Female, worn thin by time but sharp as a blade. "This is Colonel Amanda Vala of the Terran Remnant Fleet. If you're receiving this, you've encountered the hollow. You've seen what they do." A pause. The weight of centuries pressed down on every word. "We tried to warn the galaxy. No one listened." Vorgul's claws dug into the command console. The arrogance of the Vorthak Dominion had been legendary. They had dismissed humanity as fractured, weak, a species too busy tearing itself apart to matter. And yet, here they were, still standing. The human ship's weapons activated, not the sleek, energy-efficient beams of Vorthak design, but brutal kinetic arrays, railgun batteries, the size of small cities, their barrels humming with pent-up destruction. The hollow reacted. They flinched. For the first time since the battle began, the swarm hesitated. Gromnock's voice was barely audible. "They're afraid." A lost transmission crackled again, this time with a grim amusement. "They should be." Then the human ship fired. The railguns discharged in sequence, each shot a thunderclap in the void. The projectiles struck the heart of the swarm, and where they hit, the hollow screamed, not in fury, but in pain. Their silver-black bodies ruptured, their forms unraveling like frayed wire. Vorgul's tactical display lit up with new data. The human weapons weren't just damaging the hollow, they were disrupting them, breaking whatever held them together. The scientist in Gromnock surged forward. Their weapons. They're tuned to a specific resonance frequency. The hollow's cohesion is vulnerable to. The rest of his words were drowned out as the human ship moved. It wasn't just a vessel, it was a predator. It carved through the swarm like a knife, its engines flaring crimson, its guns never ceasing. The hollow tried to regroup, tried to adapt, but the humans had fought them before, had learned, and now they were teaching. Vorgul watched, his mind reeling. The Vorthak Dominion had spent millennia perfecting war. They had believed themselves the pinnacle of martial evolution. And yet, here were the humans, broken, ancient, outnumbered, doing what the Dominion could not. The transmission came one last time, Vala's voice cutting through the chaos. "You want to live? Then listen closely. The hollow have a weakness, and we're about to show you how to exploit it." The human ship's core flared, a brilliant, violent red, and then it charged. straight into the heart of the swarm, straight toward the vast, hungry shape lurking beyond. Vorgul realized, too late, what was about to happen. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hunting, and the Vorthak were about to witness what happened when prey became the predator. Section Fe, the scars of soul, the human warship Indomitable burned through the void like a dying star, its hull bleeding radiation, its engines screaming in protest. It should have been dead. By all known laws of physics, warfare, and sanity, it should have been dead. Yet it moved. Vorgul's claws dug into the command console of his flagship, the Dominion's will, as he watched the impossible unfold. The human vessel was a ruin, its armor pitted and scorched, entire decks exposed to vacuum, its energy signatures flickering like a candle in a storm. But it did not stop. It did not falter. It charged, straight into the writhing mass of the hollow swarm. The tactical display painted the nightmare in cold, merciless data. The hollow were legion, a tide of chitinous horrors, their forms shifting, adapting, learning from every engagement. They had consumed entire star systems, their hunger infinite, their evolution relentless. The Vorthak Dominion had fought them for cycles, losing world after world, fleet after fleet. And now, this broken human ship was doing what entire Vorthak battle groups could not. It was winning. Gromnok, the Dominion's chief xenologist, stood frozen beside Vorgul, his secondary eyes twitching as he processed the sensor feeds. Their ship. It should have been torn apart by now, he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. The structural integrity, it defies all logic. Vorgul didn't answer. He couldn't, because the humans weren't just defying logic, they were rewriting it. The Indomitable's hull screamed as it plowed into the swarm, its remaining weapons firing in precise, brutal salvos. Railgun slugs punched through hollow bio ships, detonating in bursts of white-hot shrapnel. Plasma lances carved through the swarm like a blade through flesh, their searing arcs leaving molten scars in the void. But it wasn't the weapons that made Vorgul's blood run cold. It was the way they fought. The humans didn't just fire. They aimed. Every shot was calculated, every detonation timed to maximize carnage. They weren't just killing the hollow, they were dismantling them. And then the transmission came again. Colonel Vallis' voice, ragged but unbroken, crackled across the comms. "You see that? That's called a weak point." The tactical display lit up as the Indomitable's remaining missiles streaked toward a massive hollow bioship, a carrier, its hide pulsing with grotesque life. The warheads didn't just explode, they burrowed. And then the hollow ship screamed, a sound no living thing should have been able to make. The bioship convulsed, its flesh blackening, its tendrils thrashing as something inside it burned. Gromnok's breath hissed through his mandibles, there targeting the neural clusters, the core of the hollow's coordination. Vorgul's mind reeled. The Dominion had spent decades trying to find a way to disrupt the hollow's hive mind. They had theorized, experimented, failed, and the humans had known all along. The Indomitable's engines flared again, its course unrelenting. It wasn't just fighting the swarm, it was hurting it. Pushing the hollow toward something, toward the vast shadowed shape lurking at the edge of the system. A thing so massive it warped the light around it, a presence that made even the hollow hesitate. Vorgul's instincts screamed. That was no mere ship. That was a queen. And the humans weren't just hunting. They were leading the swarm to its own slaughter. Captain Ryan Webb's voice cut through the static, his words a grim promise. "You wanted to know how we survived? This is how." The Indomitable's core detonated. Not in destruction, in sacrifice. The blast wasn't fire or shrapnel. It was data, a pulse of corrupted code, a weaponized scream of human defiance, screaming into the hollow's hive mind like a virus. The swarm convulsed, ships writhed, their forms twisting in agony. The Queen's massive bulk shuddered, its hide splitting as something inside it tore, The hollow didn't die. They shattered. Vorgul stood in the aftermath, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The humans had done the impossible, not with superior technology, not with overwhelming force, but with understanding. They had fought the hollow before. They had learned them, and then they had broken them. Gromnock's voice was hollow. They knew. They knew how to kill them. Vorgul looked at the wreckage of the Indomitable, at the drifting corpses of hollow ships, at the dying embers of human defiance, and for the first time in his life, he felt fear, not of the hollow, but of the species that had beaten them. The last transmission played, Vala's voice, a whisper in the dark. "Welcome to the war, Vorthak. Now you know why we're still here." The screen went black, and Vorgul understood. The scars of soul ran deep, and humanity had carved every single one of them in blood. The wreckage of the Indomitable still burned in the void, its shattered hull drifting like a corpse in the abyss. Vorgul stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Eternal Conqueror, his claws flexing against the cold metal railing. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was worse than any explosion. The humans had done what the Vorthak could not. They had understood the hollow, and then they had killed them. Gromnock's voice crackled through the comms, his usual arrogance replaced by something disturbingly close to awe. "Commander, we've found something." The data core was a blackened, jagged thing, torn from the wreckage of the human warship. It should have been dead, its systems reduced to molten slag by the hollow's final assault. But somehow, impossibly, it still pulsed with faint energy, a last whisper of defiance. Vorgul watched as Gromnock's technicians worked, their silver-purple interfaces flickering as they attempted to breach the human encryption. The Vorthak had cracked 1,000 species codes before, their military-grade decryption suites unmatched in the galaxy. This one resisted. Gromnock's frustration was palpable, his spines flaring in agitation. "This isn't just encryption, it's a mind. It fights back." Vorgul leaned closer, his breath fogging the reinforced glass of the containment chamber. The core was scarred, its surface etched with deep gouges, not from battle, but from time. This was old, older than the war, older than the Indomitable itself. When the core finally yielded, it did so not with surrender, but with a final, exhausted sigh. The holographic display flickered to life, casting the chamber in a sickly blue glow. Not as it was now, a graveyard of shattered cities and silent tombs, but as it had been before. A human voice, ragged with age, spoke. "This is Colonel Amanda Vala, last acting commander of the Martian defense grid. If you're hearing this, then we lost." The image shifted, a battlefield. Not in space, but on the red sands of Mars itself. Human soldiers, clad in battered armor, fought something wrong. Something that moved like liquid shadow, that tore through steel and flesh with equal ease. The hollow, but not as the Vorthak knew them. These were younger. Vala's voice continued, her words measured, clinical. The tone of a soldier reciting a death report. They came from the outer dark. No warning, no demands, just hunger. We thought we were ready, we weren't. The footage showed human cities burning, their defenses crumbling. But then, the humans adapted. They began to fight differently, not with brute force, but with patterns. They lured the hollow into kill zones, baiting them with false retreats, then striking when the creatures overextended. Vala's voice hardened. "They're not invincible, they're predictable. They follow patterns, instincts, and instincts can be exploited." The footage cut to a laboratory. Human scientists dissecting a captured hollow, their instruments glowing under sterile lights. "We found their weakness." Vorgul's blood ran cold. The humans hadn't just fought the hollow. They had studied them. They had taken them apart. The transmission ended abruptly, the core finally giving out with a dying hiss. Silence filled the chamber. Gromnock was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, They knew. Vorgul said nothing, because he understood now. The scars of soul were not just from war. They were from victory, and humanity had paid for it in blood. The last image lingered in the air like a ghost. A single line of text, scrawled in human script across the blackened screen. We held the line, now it's your turn. And for the first time in centuries, Vorgul felt something unfamiliar. Section Fey. The silent war, the command chamber aboard the Void Spike, hummed with the low, pulsing thrum of its silver-purple core. The air smelled of charged ions and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Vorgul stood motionless before the flickering remains of the human transmission, his claws flexing unconsciously against the command console. The last words, "We held the line, now it's your turn," burned in his mind like a brand. Gromnock's breathing was shallow, his cranial ridges flushed dark with agitation. His claws tapped rapidly against his data slate, pulling up fragmented records, referencing the horrors they had just witnessed. The Hollow had been a myth to the Vorthak Dominion, a whispered nightmare from the edges of known space. But the humans had not only faced them, they had broken them. Vorgul turned his gaze to the tactical hololith, where the remnants of Sol's defenses still glowed faintly. The wreckage of human warships, the skeletal remains of orbital platforms, none of it matched the crude, stumbling species the Dominion's archives had dismissed. The humans had not merely fought, they had engineered their survival. A low chime sounded from the comms array. "High Commander," came the voice of Sublegate Kraz, his tone strained. "The forward scouts report movement near the third planet's debris field." Vorgul's spine stiffened. Defined movement, unknown signatures, small fast. A pause. "They're hiding." Gromnock's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. Nothing could have survived the Hollow's purge." Vorgul exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The humans had left a message, but had they left more? The Void Spike's stealth systems engaged as it descended toward the debris field, its silver-purple hull shimmering into near invisibility against the void. The wreckage here was different. Not just shattered metal, but organized destruction. Hulks of human warships lay in defensive formations, their scorched armor still bearing the marks of desperate last stands. Then the scanners caught it. A flicker, a distortion in the radiation patterns. Something was alive down there. Vorgul's claws tightened around the armrests of his command throne. Magnify. The hololith resolved into a grainy image, a cluster of human-made structures, half buried in the ruins. "Not a colony, not a base," Gromnock hissed. "Those are automated defense platforms. But they're not just dormant, they're waiting." Vorgul's blood ran cold. The humans had seeded their dead system with sentinel guns, and they had only activated now, when another power entered their graveyard. The first shot came without sound. A lance of white-hot plasma seared past the Void Spike's prow, missing by meters. The second struck true, a direct hit to the ventral shields, sending shockwaves through the deck. "Evasive," Vorgul barked. The Void Spike twisted violently, its engines flaring silver, purple as it dodged another volley. The human guns were learning, adjusting their trajectories with terrifying precision. Gromnock's voice was a snarl. "They're not just automated, they're adaptive." Vorgul bared his teeth. Of course they were. The humans had built these things to fight the Hollow, to outthink them, and now the Vorthak were caught in the same web. The battle was silent, fought in the vacuum's eerie stillness. The Void Spike's weapons returned fire, its energy lances carving through the human defenses. But for every gun destroyed, 2 more emerged from hidden caches beneath the wreckage. Then, abruptly, the firing ceased. The scanners showed nothing. No movement, no heat signatures, only silence. Vorgul waited, his muscles coiled. A new signal flickered across the comms, an encrypted burst, human in origin. Gromnock decoded it in seconds. A single phrase, repeating, "Identify, friend or foe." Vorgul stared at the words, his mind racing. The humans had not just left a warning, they had left judgment, and now, the Vorthak stood at the edge of their graveyard, being weighed. He exhaled, then he input his response. The system waited, a new transmission, an image resolved, a human face. Colonel Amanda Vala, her features gaunt but unbroken, her eyes burning with the same defiance as the corpses in the ruins. Then prove it. The hololith flickered, and the real war began. The hololith shimmered, casting Colonel Vala's face in spectral silver, her features carved from the same unyielding steel as the ruins around them. The transmission was not just a message, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown across the void between predator and prey. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the metal groaning under his grip. His instincts screamed at him to retaliate, to crush this insolence beneath the might of the Vorthak war machine. But something deeper, colder, slithered through his veins. The humans had not just survived, they had planned for this. Gromnock's voice crackled through the comms, his usual arrogance frayed at the edges. Commander, the signal is not just a broadcast, it's a beacon, it's pinging something beneath the surface. Vorgul's mandibles twitched. What kind of something? The answer came not in words, but in the shuddering groan of the earth itself. Deep beneath the ruins, something awoke. The ground trembled first, a low tectonic growl that sent fissures spiderwebbing through the rubble. Then came the sound, a metallic shriek, like a vault door being forced open after centuries of silence. From the wreckage of what the Vorthak had assumed was a collapsed bunker, a slab of reinforced alloy moved. It slid aside with hydraulic precision, revealing a yawning black maw beneath. The dust swirled, caught in an updraft of stale, recycled air rushing out, air that had been sealed away for years. Then, the lights flickered on, row after row of crimson activation runes ignited along the walls of the shaft, descending into the planet's bowels like the veins of some slumbering beast. The Vorthak scanners screamed as they registered the energy spike, not the crude fission reactors they had expected, but something far more refined. A fusion core, military grade, and it was powering up. Colonel Vala's voice cut through the static once more, her tone glacial. You wanted to see what we were hiding. Here it is. The first drone emerged from the darkness. It was not like the crude automated turrets the Vorthak had dismantled. This was sleek, predatory, a skeletal frame of blackened alloy, its limbs ending in monomolecular talons. Its single optic burned like a dying star, locking onto the nearest Vorthak soldier before the alien even registered the threat. Then it moved. In the span of a breath, it crossed the distance, its claws shearing through armor as if it were parchment. The Vorthak warrior barely had time to scream before his body hit the ground in pieces. More drones followed. Dozens. Hundreds. They poured from the shaft like a swarm of mechanical locusts, their movements synchronized, their targeting flawless. They did not waste ammunition. They did not hesitate. They hunted. Vorgul watched the carnage unfold on the tactical display, his blood running cold. This was not a last stand. This was an ambush. The humans had not just buried their dead here. They had buried their weapons, and now the Vorthak had stepped into their grave. Gromnock's voice was a ragged whisper. Commander, the drones. They're not just attacking, they're hurting us. Vorgul saw it then. The drones were not engaging randomly. They were cutting off retreat paths, forcing the Vorthak into kill zones where the terrain favored the defenders. Where something was waiting, a new signal blared across the comms, an encrypted burst, human in origin. Gromnock decoded it with trembling claws, a single word: judgment. Then the earth split open from the depths of the shaft. Something rose, a war machine, not a drone. Not a tank. It was a monstrosity of blackened steel and crimson optics. Its hull scarred from battles the Vorthak had never recorded. Its arms ended in twin rotary cannons, each barrel humming with charged plasma. Its back bristled with missile pods, their warheads pulsing with unstable energy. But the worst part was its face, or rather, the lack of one, where a head should have been. There was only a smooth, featureless plate, a blank slate that somehow radiated more menace than any snarling visage. Then the plate split. A single vertical slit opened, revealing a searing white light within, and from that light, a voice spoke. Not through speakers, not through comms, but directly into the Vorthak's minds. You should have left. The Titan's cannon spun up, and the world turned to fire, to be continued. Section Fae. The last transmission before humanity arrived. The Vorthak command bunker shuddered as the Titan's first salvo carved through their forward defenses. The air tasted of scorched metal and ionized plasma, the scent of war that even their filtration systems couldn't purge. Vorgul, the Vorthak High Commander, watched the holographic displays flicker and die, replaced by static and the occasional burst of screaming comms from dying soldiers. His claws flexed against the command console, the dark steel groaning under his grip. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans were prey. Fragile, divided, their history a graveyard of self-inflicted wounds. The Vorthak had studied them for decades, watched their wars, their petty squabbles, their laughable attempts at unity. They had dismissed them as another species to be harvested, another world to be claimed. The bunker's reinforced doors buckled inward, the sound like a dying beast's final gasp. Gromnok, the lead scientist, hissed through his mandibles, his violet ocular implants flickering with frantic scans. Commander, the energy readings. Vorgul didn't need the data. He could feel it, the Titan was coming. Outside, the battlefield was a slaughterhouse. Vorthak war machines, once the pinnacle of their brutal utilitarian design, lay in twisted ruins, their silver-purple energy cores sputtering like dying stars. The Titan moved through them like a storm, its rotary cannons never ceasing, its missiles finding every weak point, every gap in their defenses. It wasn't just killing them, it was erasing them. The Titan stopped, its blank faceplate turned toward the command bunker, that searing white slit burning into the darkness. A transmission cut through the Vorthak's encrypted channels. Not a hack, not a breach, an invasion. The voice filled their skulls again, a whisper that carried the weight of extinction. You wanted to see humanity's weakness. The Titan's weapons cycled down. Here it is. The ground trembled. From the smoke and ruin, more figures emerged. Not machines, not drones. Colonel Amandavala stepped forward, her armor blackened from battle, her visor reflecting the dying light of the Vorthak's fallen. Behind her, Captain Ryan Webb and a dozen others fanned out, their weapons humming with the same lethal promise as the Titans. But they weren't aiming. They were waiting. Vorgul's blood ran cold. This wasn't a retreat. This wasn't desperation. This was a message, and the humans had come to deliver it in person. Gromnok's scanners finally locked onto the data stream flooding their systems. He recoiled, his mandibles clicking in horror. Commander, Vorgul didn't need to hear it. He already knew the humans hadn't just fought back. They had recorded everything, every death, every defeat, every moment of Vorthak weakness. And they were broadcasting it, not to their own people, not to rally their forces, but to the galaxy. To every empire, every warlord, every scavenger species that had ever looked at humanity and thought. The Titan's voice returned, softer now. Final. You should have left. And then the transmission ended. Just as the humans opened fire, the void between stars was never truly silent. It thrummed with the echoes of dying ships, the crackle of ruptured hulls, the last gasps of engines torn apart by human fire. The Vorthak Armada, once an unstoppable force of silver-purple might, now drifted in broken formations, their brutalist warships bleeding energy from jagged wounds. Vorgul stood on the command deck of the Dread Talon, his claws digging into the steel of his console. His secondary heart pounded in his chest, a biological relic from his species' predatory past, one that had not stirred in centuries, until now, until them. The humans had not simply fought. They had unmade the Vorthak's doctrine of war. Gromnock's scanners flickered, struggling to process the data still flooding their systems. The humans had done more than broadcast their defiance to the galaxy. They had weaponized memory, every Vorthak defeat, every hesitation, every moment of fear, captured, compressed, and hurled into the abyss for all to witness. The Vorthak had come expecting prey. They had found predators. The human fleet moved like a storm given form. Their ships were not elegant. They bore the scars of 1,000 battles, their hulls patched and reinforced with asymmetrical plating, their weapon arrays jury, rigged from salvaged tech and stolen Vorthak cannons. But they worked, and they were everywhere. The Indomitable, the human flagship, hung at the center of the maelstrom, its railguns humming with contained fury. Smaller vessels, fast, brutal things, with names like Reckoning and Last Breath, darted between the wreckage, their engines flaring violet. As they executed maneuvers no Vorthak pilot could replicate. Because the humans cheated, they ignored inertia. They burned fuel like it was infinite. They pushed their ships, and themselves, past the point of endurance, past the threshold of sanity, and they laughed while doing it. Colonel Amanda Vala stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her fingers resting lightly on the tactical display. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She calculated. The Vorthak had made a fatal error. They had assumed humanity's greatest weapon was its technology. They were wrong. It was their memory. Every war humanity had ever fought, every loss, every atrocity, every moment they had been pushed to the brink, had been carved into their bones. They did not forget. They did not forgive. And they learned. The Vorthak had come with the arrogance of conquerors. The humans had come with the patience of survivors. Captain Ryan Webb moved through the corridors of a dying Vorthak cruiser, his armor slick with alien blood. The boarding action had been swift, brutal, and personal. The Vorthak had never faced warriors who fought like this, who hunted like this. Webb's HUD flickered, tagging the last pockets of resistance. His squad moved in perfect silence, their weapons humming with barely restrained energy. They had no need for speeches, no need for grand declarations. The message had already been sent, and now they delivered the punctuation. Vorgul watched as his fleet died around him, not in glorious battle, not in honorable defeat, but in dismantlement. The humans did not simply destroy. They took apart. They scavenged, repurposed, turned Vorthak technology against its creators with terrifying efficiency. And worst of all, they left witnesses. A handful of ships, crippled but intact, their comms still broadcasting. So the galaxy would see, so the galaxy would know. The last transmission from the Indomitable was not a demand for surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was 3 words, spoken softly into the dark. We remember everything. And then silence. The humans were gone, but the echoes remained, and the galaxy would never forget.